everybody. Welcome to Living One. I'm your host, Olivia Crossman. Living One is a monthly webinar series, now in its 5th year, in which presenters from around the world share their vision of a future where all Earth beings live as one community in peace, dignity, and freedom. We ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? Today, we have the 4th and final session of our last 2023 series, Contemplative Activism and Nonviolent Action. All radical and long-lasting social justice movements, such as the Indian Salt March and the American Civil Rights, are rooted in practices of contemplative activism, reflective of nature's principles and ethics of nonviolence. The 4 speakers in this series have reflected on their personal transformative work and engagement in nonviolent action. Our guest today is Rhonda Fabian. Rhonda is the editor of Kosmos Quarterly. She is an ordained member in the Order of Interbeing, an international Buddhist community founded by her teacher Thích Nhất Hạnh. Rhonda is also a founding partner of Immediacy Learning, an educational media company that has impacted millions of learners worldwide. Beginning her career as a video journalist for CNN and public broadcasting, Rhonda achieved press club recognition for chronicling the desegregation of Louisiana and spent years immersed in the musical traditions of New Orleans. She studied anthropology and completed her master's studies at the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. Rhonda lives and is active in Transition Town Media, Pennsylvania. She is a mother, court-appointed special advocate for abused and neglected children, and an NGO representative to the United Nations for Kosmos Associates. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different Indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Krulo Center for Nonviolence, located in Southern Oregon, is homelands of the grizzly bear takelma, Dakubedite, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Rhonda will be speaking for about 45 minutes, after which we will have 15 minutes for question and answer. Please do keep your microphone muted to avoid any unintended interruptions. If you have any questions for Rhonda, type them into the chat and we will read them out after the presentation. For anyone who isn't familiar with the Zoom chat function, if you move your cursor towards the bottom of the screen, you will see a number of icons appear, one of which is the chat function towards the center left of your screen. If you click on that, the chat will appear where you can type any questions or comments as we go. This Zoom session will be recorded, so if you would feel more comfortable leaving your camera off or changing your Zoom name, please feel free to do so. Finally, we ask that all of us participate with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to offer. So without further ado, we welcome Rhonda Fabian.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And thank you so much for your service to our sibling animal friends and your dedication. And hello, everyone, now and in the future. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you so much for joining us. To start off, do you want to tell us a little bit about your arc? How did you get to where you are today and what you're doing today?
You know, that seems like such a straightforward question, right? Like, who are you and where do you come from and what's important to you, right? The particulars of my childhood, my own particular trauma are not that relevant, really. Let me just say that my childhood was chaotic and I left home at 16. And lived as an unsheltered youth, or lived rough, as we say, on the streets in New York as a young woman. My mother had owned and operated a small restaurant where I had met many different kinds of people from all walks of life. And I noticed that people suffered a lot. You know, as a child, I simply noticed that people carried a lot of fear and trauma, especially as a girl. I noticed that women suffered in particular. And when I left home and I took sort of what I had learned from meeting all of these people that came in and out of this restaurant. I took this into the streets of New York. So I was very interested in this whole concept of suffering. I gravitated to the culture of the West Village, where it was a time of the early feminist movement, and so there was a circle of feminist intellectuals who sort of reluctantly, accepted me into their circle, and I had a chance to really learn a lot from them about human rights, direct action. And they allowed me to sit in on a few of those early encounter sessions. These were informal circles with women, and I still am part of many of these kinds of circles today. It's interesting, right? But I was only 16, so they let me sit in on these circles where women shared very difficult stories about rape, spousal abuse, child custody disputes, and discrimination based on sexual and gender expression. So that was very eye-opening to me. And it just sparked my curiosity about people's stories and how they overcame adversity. I sort of I was interested in spirituality, Eastern spirituality to a degree, but I was sort of digging shallow wells, here and there. And I didn't really find that wellspring that I was looking for. And I would hear people say things like that they, like sort of a desire to get revenge on other people, or that they were fed up, or they were going to, they wanted to cause harm in some way. And I had never had feelings like that myself. And I wondered, I never wanted to hurt an animal, a person, a moth, a snail, anything. And so I just started sort of asking people where these feelings were coming from. But it wasn't until decades later that, I met my spiritual teacher, Thích Nhất Hạnh, that I began to really understand the true nature of violence and suffering, and how to reduce them in myself and in the people around me.
Beautiful. And how did you meet Thích Nhất Hạnh? That sounds like that was really what set you on the nonviolent path, if you were interested in it prior.
Well, two things happened simultaneously in 2012. One, I was sitting in a bar and someone handed me a copy of Kosmos, and I was flipping through it, and I just felt a sort of, it's the word frisson? Is that the right word? But, an electricity almost.
Sure.
I went home and ordered all the back issues. And so I'm sure this got on Nancy's radar, like, who is this person? And then the next thing I knew, I was in a car driving up to Lenox, Massachusetts, and, knocking on her door. And when she opened the door, we just fell into each other's arms. And this was the beginning of my relationship with Kosmos Journal. Just weeks after that, I had read Thich Nhất Hạnh writings over the 20 years prior to that. But they just sort of stayed on my shelf, more or less. And then just 2 weeks after I met Nancy, a book literally fell off my bookshelf, right? And I picked it up, and it was Ty's book, Peace is Every Step. And I read it again, cover to cover. And then I went on the internet and said, well, where is he? What's the deal with him? And I saw that there was an educators retreat in London in 4 days. And so the next thing I knew, I was on a plane. I told my husband, I'm going to London. And I went to London to this educators retreat. And that was it. That was it. It was transformational for me. And when I had a kind of amazing experience of him, actually. He spoke, and of course, many people have had this experience of feeling that Thich is speaking directly to them, and I really felt like he was speaking to me. And then when we did walking meditation, Thich had instructed us, don't take a step until you feel you can really take a step in true peace and freedom. Take each step in peace and freedom. So of course, I'm not taking a step at all, and everyone is leaving, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I better keep up, right? So I was sort of at the end of this group, and we went to this garden at the university in London, very beautiful. It was springtime. And as I stepped into the garden, Ty was right there in front of me. They must have gone around in a circle, you see. So we were face to face, not this far apart, and his face just lit up with like recognition, and I think my face just lit up. It was a true momentous moment. And then he went and sat with his attendants by this beautiful fountain, and it was just gorgeous. And then a breeze came suddenly, and all of these cherry blossoms began to just float down around him, and I just wept. I just felt I was in the presence of a living Buddha. And from that day on, I followed him, whenever I could, to wherever he was, whether it was Canada, France, North America, until he had his stroke and was unable to attend retreats anymore.
That's incredible. Just the serendipity and the magic of that story is incredible.
It all happened within a 2-week period of time, so
oh my goodness.
I guess it was meant to be.
It really sounds like it. It really sounds like it. That's incredible. And is that so? How did you then become an ordained member of the Order of Interbeing? And for anyone who's not familiar, do you want to give us a little bit of information about what that is?
Well, Thích Nhất Hạnh, who has passed away now, was a very humble monk who many of you probably know was active as a peace builder during the Vietnam War. So he saw the incredible suffering and violence going on in villages all around him. And Buddhism, his experience of Buddhism had been more or less confined to the monastery. So spending most of your time in the monastery, spending time, in meditation. But he realized that there was a need for a deeply engaged Buddhism. In other words, how do we take this quality of wakefulness and this capacity for tremendous compassion out of the meditation hall, right, to where the suffering is greatest. So this is really the gift that he brought to the West, is this idea of an engaged Buddhism. And they would go into the villages, and he personally would gather the bodies of children and others who had been killed in the war and the wounded, and in carts, and bring them back to be buried or to be cared for. And this extended all through the war. And then, I could tell many, many stories about how he became a person of great note in Vietnam, and he led many, many different initiatives. Well, when he came, he himself was exiled from Vietnam. He wrote a book, which was a guidebook for those who were in his school of social justice, young people like yourself, who were very dedicated to this idea of an engaged Buddhism. And he wrote a book on interbeing. And this was really the first time that he brought this term forward, which simply, emphasizes the deep, deep connection between all life, all living things. And it was a guidebook for his students. And out of that, a order arose. We can say that he had the first members of the Order of Interbeing were 5 monks and nuns. And then gradually over the years, the order grew, but growing it was never really the intention. It was more about building what we call fourfold community, which is the monastic brothers and sisters and the lay monastics like myself, men and women who support each other and support this practice of engaged Buddhism. So I don't want to give the idea that becoming a member of the Order of Interbeing is like climbing a ladder. You know, it's not that sort of thing. If you have an aspiration to be a Sangha builder, to be someone who wants to continue these sort of circles of, encounter and understanding and building understanding of the Dharma, then you can aspire to join the Order of Interbeing.
That's incredible. And it sounds, I was reading yesterday about transition towns. It says in your bio that that's where you currently live, is in Transition Town, Media, Pennsylvania. And would you say that that's part of your work and life there? Is this like Sangha building? They sound related from what I read, but maybe you could talk a little bit about a transition town and your experience with that.
Sure, thank you. Of course, these things are all deeply related, right? All the work that we're doing in the world, I'm sure everyone here and many of the people that will watch this in the future, we're engaged in the same basic work. We live in a time of profound change. I mean, what some people call the poly crisis, the meta crisis, and we're all seeking ways to hold this reality and to do and be the best we can at this moment. I mean, we're here at such a profound moment in time, right? So I think that with the transition movement, which began in the UK, in Totnes, England, was a response, early, maybe, kind of an early response to this idea that the world is changing and we're reaching our capacity in so many ways, in terms of peak oil, in terms of food and water, in terms of, economy, and how can we create, what Charles Eisenstein calls the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. How can we create this world under the constraints that we face on a daily basis? So transition said, well, the way that we do it is we have to imagine, each community is different. We have to imagine the future that we want, and then we have to see what are the steps to begin going in that direction, moving in that direction. And we don't wait for permission, right, to create this community, which is based more on sharing of resources, which is based more on neighborship, which is based on inner transformation, preparedness, local living economy, supporting our farmers, supporting our artisans where we live, and knowing our neighbors and being together. So, this is very similar really to being in a monastery, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. It sounds it. How long have you lived in one of these communities?
Around the same time that I became involved with Kosmos and also with Thai, I would say just a couple years before that, I became a member of Transition Town Media. Media is the name of our town. The beauty of transition, if anybody's involved in it or becomes engaged in it, there are so many transition towns. You can find them, you can look it up and find out if there's one near you, or you can start one. The beauty of transition is each person works from their interests and their strengths. So those of us who care about food may become involved in what we call yardening or working with local farmers. Those of us who care about recycling and upcycling might want to start a free store, which is what I did with some other people in our community, which is still going. It's a free, everything is free. It's a hub for the community. People come, and share stories and share their possessions. So I forgot your question, but how long? Yeah, I guess it's been about 12, 15 years.
That's incredible. That sounds like a very formative couple of years there, where the books are falling off the shelf and you're meeting all these people. That's incredible.
Right.
And have you enjoyed this experience? This is such an interesting, I mean, we talk a lot at Krulos about Sangha building and community engagement. And this sounds like I'd not previously heard of this movement before or these communities. Oh. So I'm just fascinated by this. And it sounds amazing. Do you enjoy the experience of it and being involved?
I do. I mean, I feel like I was more deeply involved on, the steering committee and all of that a few years ago. But often what happens in transition is that we find, our stream or our lane, and we start going, down that. So for me, being that, I became ordained in the Order of Interbeing and so on, for me, that lane had more to do with building Sangha. So we have a very thriving Sangha in media that meets once a week, and it's growing. We're even outgrowing our space, to tell you the truth. And then we have an online version of that we started during the pandemic, and that's still going. And I have some other online circles as well. So this, and I spend a good bit of time, at the monastery. So this idea of being together in circle, which comes even, from our indigenous ancestors, our indigenous friends, way of counsel, right? That we can sit in a circle and share deeply about our own practice, share deeply about our own experience, and find refuge in that kind of intimate connection, which can be very freeing and can relieve a lot of suffering. That's really been my path. Absolutely.
And is there anything you've taken away or that you'd like to share about this more, alternative style of life and style of community? It seems like a very healing way to live and exist in the world. Is there anything that you've taken away from it that you think people could maybe incorporate into their day-to-day outside of these kinds of communities, or if they're looking to build one of these communities?
Sure. I mean, your introduction is so lovely, Olivia. You make me sound like a very important person. And actually, I have a very normal life, I have to say. I have 2 grown children. My daughter is going to have a baby, so it's our first.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. And, I live with my husband, and, we really actually have a pretty normal life. But what has really grown for me, especially in recent years, is I feel an increasing capacity to not identify with, my thinking mind, with my thoughts. And I know you wanted to talk today about nonviolence. And I think before we even get into that discussion of nonviolence, we want to ask ourselves, what is violence? Like, we think we know, right? We think that violence is something that happens out there. It's in Ukraine, it's in Israel and Gaza, it's gun violence. And yes, heartbreaking violence exists in the world, especially violence. I find violence to children and animals unbearable, personally. But what is the root of it? What is the root of violence? And I think that this has been really the key focus for me in the past couple years, is understanding that violence, all violence, has its root in, what may be called the ego or the thinking mind, our mind, in ourselves. Yeah. It begins with the idea of discrimination, this, not that. I like this, not that, and the idea of separation, that, I, me, mine, I'm separate from you, I'm separate from nature. It's a basic restless dissatisfaction with what is. And, I wish it were warmer today. I wish that person were more attractive. I wish my childhood was different. I wish my marriage was different. We just have all of this constant grievance that's kind of going on. And to the extent that we identify with these thoughts, that we think of them as defining us, I'm a victim, I'm the aggrieved party in this dispute. You know, the extent to which we identify, the more internal violence that we do to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's true, many of us have suffered external violence. Perhaps we've been a victim of a crime or an abuse, or maybe we witnessed violence or experienced trauma. And we also inherit trauma from our families, from our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
We inherit from our society violent acts committed in our name, in our country, in the past, and even in the present moment. And so we carry a lot of what Eckhart Tolle called the pain body, right? The pain body. This is the sum total of all the unprocessed trauma. And the more we identify with it, the more that becomes how we define ourselves, the more suffering we endure, and the more it spreads out to those around us as violence. But it's not who we are. You know, the ego is not who we are, and the pain body is not who we are. They're part of the human condition, our never-ending dissatisfaction, but it's not who we are. So nonviolence then is the ability to turn our attention away from our thoughts and our ego and from the pain body, and to shine the light of our awareness elsewhere. So where are we? Where do we shine that light? It's on the ever-present authenticity of being, on what is, not what we wish to be. So when we think of an animal in nature, for example, alert to the sounds and the smells and the sensations of the moment, it's much closer to who we are. If you've sat in a forest and been alert to everything going on around you, or had that moment of awe when you see a sunset and you're completely focused on the beauty of that moment, it's much closer to who you are. And we've all had moments like this, and think, oh, that's such a special moment. Well, that's because it's who you are. Can I give Can I give a demonstration?
Please.
Okay, so I have my bell, right? So I'll invite the bell, and listen attentively as you can until you think that you can no longer hear it. I hope you can hear the full sound. You know, sometimes sound is funny on Zoom, but let's see. So what you might notice is that as the sound subsides, the alertness increases. You're listening. The alertness, until all that remains for a moment is the alertness. The thinking mind subsides as well, right? And then the thinking mind comes back. We'll do it one more time. And I'm also just enjoying the sound of some crows. I don't know if you can hear them here.
Yes, they're beautiful with the bell.
Yes, it's beautiful. So this quality, even if we only notice it for a moment, is closer to our true nature. And the more you're able to dwell in that state, even for a few minutes, then the less suffering you experience. And you begin to notice how other things and living beings around you also dwell in presence. They also dwell in the reality of the present moment. And this is the beginning of true nonviolence.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's beautiful. And if you think of, so if presence is the start of nonviolence, do you see then contemplative activism and contemplative practices as a whole as crucial in a practice of nonviolence?
Yes, it's important to practice, because it's with practice that we're able to experience these moments of presence more frequently. Mm-hmm. Yet the practices themselves have to be grounded in values, I guess you could say. I think values mm-hmm. is a good word. Nancy Roof, who started Kosmos, started it at the UN with a group of people who were, I guess you could call them influencers at that time, ambassadors, spiritual leaders, who noticed that the values of the United Nations were implied, but weren't directly enacted and embodied. Mm. They weren't stated. And so she played an important role in inserting the word values more into the discourse at various UN proceedings. And it was out of that work that Kosmos emerged. So I think, and we always get in, it's always tricky territory when we talk about values, because it's like, whose values? Whose values? I'm an older white woman with white hair, my values, so I always want to be careful when I use the word values, but I think that some are so basic to our presence that we can talk about them. The first to me is awareness itself, awareness, to treat awareness as a value, awareness of our essential existence. So to practice this value of awareness, we have to stop running and chasing, and we have to stop consuming so much and arguing and overthinking. So this practice begins with stopping. Mm-hmm. Like my friend Bayo Akomolafe says, times are urgent, we must slow down. Mm-hmm. Right? We can practice this by bringing our awareness to the breath, because the breath is always with us from the first moment we were born until the last final exhalation of our death. We have the breath as our constant companion. So even just a few moments of quiet breathing while sitting without distraction brings us back to awareness. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sri Aurobindo, the Indian philosopher, has a quote. Let me see here. He said, let's see. He said, what is needed for the appreciation of the deepest truth of beauty is the awakening of a certain vision and insight and an intuitive response in the soul, right? And it's only by stopping and becoming aware of life's wonders that we can truly awaken to see with our soul and hear with our heart. And a second value, I would say, is openness. Openness. People say, discrimination is wrong, but let's not start from that perspective. Let's start with the value of openness, like a flower. We can be like a beautiful flower. It's a value that really is derived from nature, actually, when you think about it, because rivers and forests and mountains practice openness. The same way that the stream and the bank of the stream are co-creators, right? Or the forest doesn't, no one tells the forest how to distribute the sunlight. No one tells the mountain how to manage the rain, right? So it's this idea of allowing what is. And by doing that, we become more flexible, we become more intuitive in our response. And we benefit from the gifts and wisdom of others, right? So this idea of openness. And when we have those two values of awareness and openness, then a third one sort of naturally emerges, which is empathy, which is the reverent respect for all beings. And the understanding that all living things are engaged in the process of unfolding their innate potential, right? And so all life has value in and of itself, from the tiniest cellular life form, the atomic, to the universe itself as a great being. Life is not here for human use. We have to change our view that humans are superior to other forms of life on Earth, and learn to protect the lives of animals, plants, and minerals.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. And you wrote a little bit about recently for Kosmos about AI and our four freedoms, FDR's four freedoms of freedom of speech, freedom from fear, freedom of belief, and freedom from want. And in that article, you mentioned that while AI can infiltrate many of these freedoms and the things that these freedoms protect and represent for us, there are certain things that it can't touch, like beauty, for instance. And it sounds like when you're talking about these values of openness and empathy as critical components of nonviolence and of nonviolent action, do you see AI as a threat to nonviolence and nonviolent action, or because these components that it can't really touch are so crucial to the action that maybe it remains untouched? I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll start by, I'm certainly no expert on artificial intelligence, right? So I can't even really tell you exactly how artificial intelligence works. I've read words that describe how it works, right?
Sure.
How AI is trained on sets of data. I will say this, all technologies are two-sided, right? They can be used, even the technology of language itself can be used to do good or to do harm, right? So you can bring, let's say you have a room and you put 100 people in the room. And if they all come with mistrust and unprocessed trauma and anger and greed in their heart, the room is going to become a living hell.
Yeah. You
can put 100 people in a room who really have the best, want the very best for all beings, want to reduce suffering, have love in their hearts, have a genuine openness and empathy for others in a room, and you can create a heaven on earth. Just with the words and actions, right? So language is an example of an early technology. The same is true for AI, I think. I believe, for instance, for speech, AI can be a great tool if you're a writer and a researcher and you want to, say something more clearly, and AI can actually be quite helpful. And of course, this is very rudimentary AI, right? But AI could easily, we can see, and already is, and we can easily see how this can become more problematic, can become to repress free speech. Because if we don't know the source of something, and if it can twist facts, excuse me, and just proliferate on, say, social media, disinformation, this can, seriously hurt free speech. So it's the same with our privacy.
Yeah.
It can protect us, but it can also take away our privacy. AI uses surveillance, for instance, to monitor virtually every step we take. Hey, I mean, if you carry one of these around, and if you use a credit card, for instance, every place you go, everything you do is monitored and can easily be discovered. And that's going to become more and more ubiquitous, right? So they'll use AI to know where you are at any given moment to deliver an ad, right at that precise moment as you're walking by the shoe store, right? And as far as want, freedom from want, yes, AI could be used to make supply chains more equitable, more efficient. But it could also be used to channel resources to those who are the most away from those the most disenfranchised, right? So I don't know. We don't know yet.
Yeah. Absolutely. It remains to be seen.
It remains to be seen.
Well, I'm sure people have questions that they'd like to ask and comments to share. So as they're all typing in the chat and finalizing your questions and thoughts, I'll ask one final thing. If nonviolent action today, and I loved your definition and explanation of nonviolence so much and the role of presence, and what do you think today, in the face of everything that the violence that you spoke about, both in the day-to-day and globally in the Middle East and in Ukraine, what do you think nonviolent action looks like for the everyday person in their day-to-day lives? How can we weave that in?
Yeah, this is the question, right? Because we all want to know what to do, right? How to act. I think that especially as a white woman, I have to watch my impulse to step in and fix things. That kind of thinking sometimes causes a lot of trouble. At the monastery, I've noticed how it's in Pine Bush, New York, near Pine Bush, New York. I've noticed how the Vietnamese monks and nuns make decisions by consensus, and I mean everyone has to agree. And it can seem maddeningly slow to me as a Westerner, right? But for many centuries, I mean, this is what kept communities peaceful and whole, right? So sometimes the right action is to step back, to give others a little bit of room to breathe. My ancestors colonized various parts of the world and brought trauma of centuries of war in Europe to places where things were relatively stable and in alignment with nature. And due in part to that history, I'm cut off from my own ancient tribal ways and understandings. And it's not that we can go back to pre-modern times. It's just to notice, to recognize that we bring a lot of baggage to the situation. Great icons of nonviolent direct action like Mohandas Gandhi and the Reverend Dr. King led movements to restore dignity to their people that systematic oppression and colonization tried to remove. As a white woman, I have so much to learn from those examples in history. Sometimes the best action is non-action. If we haven't resolved our anger and our righteous indignation, if we haven't cooled the fires, we can sometimes engage in actions that don't have the outcome that we aspired to see. It can have a different outcome. So in my work at Kosmos, action, nonviolent action means amplifying the voices of others that seek peaceful resolution and just solutions, to honor Mother Earth, to regard all of creation with reverence. The world is filled with wonders and beauties that deserve our attention, and that to me is nonviolence. I have a quote from Albert Einstein about this very thing.
Beautiful.
And maybe it's a good place to end.
Yeah.
He said, my religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is utterly insignificant reflection. This feeling is the guiding principle of my life and work.
Wow.
Of course, if I see acts of abuse or discrimination or bullying, it's my nature to stand up and defend someone if they're being threatened. I cannot bear it when a child or an animal is abused. But as far as shouting slogans or confronting people who disagree with me, that's not my work at this time.
Yeah.
It's showing up where there is suffering and being in solidarity with those who are most affected.
Beautiful, Rhonda. You've given us so much to think and reflect on, and this has been incredible. I've learned so much, and your wisdom and your impact is incredible. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us and everything today.
Everyone here has much wisdom to share, so I would love to hear from some other people if that's possible.
Absolutely. We have plenty of time now for questions and comments, so if anyone would like to unmute and share or type their questions in the chat, we'll be sure to read those out. So
I'll go ahead. Rhonda, I'm Jenny. I'm with the Carrillos Center. So nice to be here with you, and thank you for your wisdom and for really being who you are. We're all one individual, but it only takes one individual, right? And so I think that that's where I would start. And you've given me a lot to ponder and think about, and a lot in similarity. I have worked with kids in the foster care system. I've worked in the human services field. I'm familiar with CASA. I'm familiar with their role, which is a whole nother, avenue. And so part of me, was thinking about in that work, right? Like the beauty of your history and your story and how that affects that work, right? And for those that don't know, it's CASA is a court-appointed special advocate, and they perform a very specific function for the underserved. And so I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that, especially because you bring in trauma and you bring up generational trauma. And I believe that we live in a world where people don't want to look at that and deal with that and don't understand the magnitude of that. And, part of our role individually, to Olivia's question about what do, we each just take care of ourselves, right? And we become more nonviolent in our thinking of self and our thinking of others. And then that's the ripple out. So there's that question, like, if you could just talk a little bit, like, how has your life story affected, impacted, changed your perspective, your view, your step in the world, if you will. And then the other piece is when you were talking, about the ego, obviously with us, we talk about non-duality all the time. It's all non-duality. But that's a word that the larger world it's only in certain arenas. It's only in certain places. Do people really understand non-duality as, we're all one, right? It's the energy, like we are all one entity. And I don't know, it just struck me when you were talking about the value of that word and that understanding. So I just throw that out there. So I'll stop there because I could speak with you for a long time. So we'll just stop.
I was definitely, I've always been, it hurts me so much to see a child suffer abuse or neglect. And I decided that I couldn't go to another country where I see these things happening on your TV, and you want to go pick up that child, but you can't. So, what you can do is you can pick up a child in your community, and really what you're doing is you're picking up the child within. You can take care of the child within. It's no different if you believe in the unitive nature of all life, the non-duality. If you believe that when I hear the crow, that there's no separation between me, I exist because the crow is calling because I exist, then the same, you can extend the same idea to a child. And so at CASA, you're given a case, usually a single case, but sometimes it involves multiple children. And then your job is to take a 360-degree view of that child's life. So you talk to everyone you talk to the child and everyone that comes into contact with the child, the teachers, the foster family, the birth family, the grandparents, the neighbors, so on and so forth, to try to help the court determine what is the best course of action to reduce the suffering of this child. And that work is very engaging and very, very meaningful. And what I discovered after several years of being a CASA is that we just don't offer enough. We don't have enough of the kinds of resources in place, in some cases, to be able to really offer a viable alternative. The foster care system is very broken. There are wonderful people in it, but it's also a very broken system. There aren't the resources at the community level in terms of housing and so on that are readily available. Sometimes there is not a safe place to send the child. So this became very painful to me. So I did it as long as I was able. I took a long break. I went back. I did it again, and now I'm also, taking a break from that work. But court-appointed special advocates and anyone who works with abused and neglected children, because these are the most abused of the abused. You can't compare necessarily abuse, but I'm telling you, these are children who have really, truly been through it and are not wanted because of those consequences result in deeply disturbed children with very difficult social behavior. So I just can't give enough compassion and credit and support to CASA. The other part of your question was about non-duality, and was that right, Jenny?
Yeah, you kind of spoke to, even just when you simply stated, the crow exists, you exist because the crow is, and the crow exists because you are. You really kind of spoke to that understanding. I think if I can add one comment, Rhonda, to what you just said about CASA, as you were talking about that and your role in that, though, what I heard you speaking of were the three values, right? Because you have to walk into it with a totally different awareness. It's not your awareness. It's truly what is the awareness of all these people, and they all have a different awareness, right? So you spoke to that. And so to me, that's something you bring in differently than other people who do that role because of what you understand. And then you talked about openness, right? Because you still have to see everybody's perspective, and then you have to navigate within that. But what you find is empathy for all of them, right? So to me, then that becomes the thread. That becomes the thing that, okay, you are able in that position because of who you are, and you're studying and you're learning and what you've incorporated. You bring a whole different perspective. You bring a whole different way of then working through this that most people don't. And so what becomes possible and available to you is something very different. And I think that that's the other side, right, to me, of what you're talking about, is a whole different world opens up to you because you brought those three values into how you even walked into it, stepped into it.
Thank you so much. I mean, you definitely have to be very open-minded because not everyone lives the way you do, not everyone thinks the way you do, not everyone feels like, has the same definition of a home or a family. And it's really, really important to attune to where the love in the situation, resides, and to try to align your recommendations with love. So.
Yeah, and so I see that as a small cosm of really the larger cosm that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
If we all did that in a larger cosm, this world would be a very different cosmos, to play on words.
You are so correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you for your responses, Rhonda. Those are incredible. We have a comment in the chat here that I'll read out. Sue says, I apologize if I've mispronounced your name, but TV could have been just good with Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, but it evolved. The telephone was better than tin cans on a string, but others listened in and then gossiped. That time is simple compared to now. AI is new and has the potential to be good for the good or not so good for the ego's sake. We are not gardening with a horse and a plow anymore. Well, most of us. Being where we are as an advancement of science is our choice. We need to pay attention to what is right and what is not good for society. As was said, staying grounded and supporting your community as best you can will allow us to handle scientific advances. Thank you for your being.
Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah, because, nations, I think, also have egoic personalities. And I think they kind of represent the sum total of the collective energy of their people. And as technologies, especially in terms of our children, have made us our attention more and more fractionalized, more and more broken up by TikTok, little bits, this little bit, that little bit, this little bit. It's hard for us to stay focused on any one thing. And so we find that, we're just moving from one thought to another all the time. And we consume so much of, so many messages of separation and violence and despair through gaming, pornography, violent programming, all this stuff, that this is just constantly churning in the minds of young people and all people, really. And then when you bring that all together in terms of a nation state, you really have a lot of toxins in the system that aren't getting processed, that aren't getting composted, right? It's too much to compost. Like if I have one word that describes me, who I am as a person, I'm a composter. That's it. I'm composting my shit, and I'm composting, the crap that comes to me from so many other places. And if it becomes too much to compost, this is when we become overwhelmed and emotional. We think that we've dealt with it, right? Oh, I've dealt with it. Oh, it's in the past. It's okay. I'm over it, right? But it's not enough to just transcend, our trauma. We have to actually compost it. We have to actually process and, resolve it. So nations are like that too. If it's not processed properly, our trauma spills out to the people around us, our families, our friends. The same is true of nations. Our trauma spills out.
That's so interesting. I love the image of like composting as our process of healing. That's so beautiful, and it puts kind of an anthropocentric lens on how we normally speak about that, because it is so, that brings it right back to the earth and our natural process. So
yes. I mean, look at the trees. I mean, I really think trees are the most evolved beings, by the way. I don't think it's humans. I think that it's trees because, they stand in one place, and they just by being trees, they save the world, right? They don't have to run around to do that. They compost all the decay and turn it into flowers or fruit, right? They take the light through photosynthesis and turn it into food, right? They take carbon dioxide. I think they make oxygen or something, right? I'm not a biologist, but they're just standing there being trees, and think of what they accomplish. So I would love to come back as a tree, because I think that that's sort of the pinnacle of evolution on Earth.
That's beautiful. It would be a gift. They're incredible beings.
And they communicate, right? Underground, like they have this whole network, right?
Oh, I know. Jenny and I have had long conversations about that, and the tree communities and what we can learn from them. It's powerful. It's powerful. This has been incredible. If anyone else would like to add something or ask a question, make a comment, go right ahead.
I think I would. I'm sorry, Mike. Just one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to you. The only thing I want to say is I find interesting, Rhonda, in looking at this whole series. Number one, because it's about nonviolence and peace, right? That every speaker has had this kind of internal peace about this conversation. Like if I look back over all 4 conversations, there's this internal peace, and you embody it very well, even to stop, take a breath before you even started speaking, right? So that took us back into the quality of your presence, to the quality of presence in this engagement. So that's an observation. There's a different level of internal peace is the only word I'll attach to that. And the other thing that you just spoke to it, is about history. And all of the speakers, in terms of talking about nonviolence, have talked about the importance of understanding our history, not only to understand so we don't create the same errors and just recreate the same circle and cycle, but to understand what's come before us so we can change where we are and change forward. And you speak of the healing property of understanding one's history as well. And so I think the other thing in that is you talked before, the circle. It's bringing in all the wisdoms, right? We can't go backwards, but there's wisdom in every aspect. Again, the openness, the awareness, and the empathy, but it then forges a very different path forward. So anyway, those were just some observations, intuitive, that came kind of out of this. But there is in nonviolence, the people that really embody it over their lifetime, the commitment to that, they have a different level of peace. There's a different level of commitment, and there's a different level of understanding our past, our present, and what that means for our future. So thank you for that. Sorry, Mike, it's all yours now.
Oh, no, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned, let's see, you mentioned Iraq. And I thought about those towers coming down, and I thought, there's no solution in retribution. We'll until we go beyond. It seems like every day we just continue to go through this retribution for everything that's done without, like you just mentioned, the history. of where we've come from and bringing it all together and understanding that history and why, if we really understood that history and how much people have been through, I don't think there would be any retribution. I think we'd find a solution without that would create fairness and distribution of opportunity and wealth and whatever. But, in nature, you just don't find that retribution. But in humanity, you find it, and it becomes so problematic. We can look around the world today and just, it's one after another. But I think you've got to we need to, I remember I wrote a letter to George Bush when he was the decision to go into Iraq. And I said the letter with the essence of it was, there's no solution in retribution. Get away from it, move forward, get beyond it. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Oh, I think it does, Mike. And maybe this is the great test. Maybe this is what the evolution of human consciousness is really about, because we know that this kind of retribution has gone on for centuries and centuries. And, when did this come into being? There must have been a point in our hominid history when we were like the other animals, where we lived in harmony with nature, and where there wasn't this idea of retribution. And even the taking of a life for food, it was not an act of violence. It was simply a natural act, right? And so it's when the mind developed the ego. I don't mean to say that the ego is a bad thing. We need the ego, but until we learn how to disidentify from the ego, right? In other words, it's the biggest imposter of us. It always wants us to think that it's us because we identify with it and feed it. Why would we want to feed ourselves violent content? Why would we want to feed ourselves bad food? Why would we want to feed ourselves all these toxins that we consume on a daily basis? Because we're feeding the pain body, we're feeding the ego. So this idea of retribution, has grown and grown and grown in the human experiment, the Earth scenario. And yet, if you believe, as I do, that there is an impulse of creation, I don't think it goes in a straight line. I think it, as many indigenous people say, that it's a spiral, it's an ever widening spiral, but that it's moving toward goodness and love and beauty and light. And to the extent that we as a species align with that impulse of creation, align our presence with the presence of all living things that are unfolding their innate potential, we'll survive as a species. To the extent that we are an impediment to the plan of the universe, we won't. But life will continue. And that's the most important thing.
Well, on that note, you look back into over 100,000 years ago. The majority of our time we were spent in the religion or the spirituality of animism. And animism still exists today in many traditional cultures around the world.
Yes, it does.
Put animism against monotheism, there becomes a huge gap. And it enables people to use colonization and those techniques to override animism and the appreciation and reverence for life, trading it off for capitalism and things like that. I don't know whether we should even get into that, but I see it as a real difficult situation.
Well, perhaps that's why this breakdown is occurring, because it's really a breakthrough. And I believe that the weight of modernity, the weight of our own egos, has become so heavy, we can no longer carry it, and we have to set it down. We have to set modernity aside, take what's good, what's helpful from modernity, but leave the rest. Leave this idea of separation, of colonization, of exploitation, of retribution behind.
Yeah.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for, all this has to be left behind. And dividing all the world with rationalism into little tiny, cells. I was just reading today, and I'll finish with this, but they've just discovered that, the fascia, which many massage therapists have known and indigenous healers and acupuncturists have known, is a very important organ of the body. It's like the cellophane, that kind of wraps everything, but it's living. It's a living, breathing entity filled with fluids that, nourish the entire body. But because of the way because of cells and the way we thought about cells as little building blocks, we never, the medical community in the West, never regarded this essential organ, the interstitium, I think they call it now. We never regarded it as a real thing. We just cut through it to get to the problem, right? Well, it is the whole thing. It is the whole thing, right? So it's the same thing with our idea of scientific rationalism and modernity itself and industrialization. It's making everything into little, categories of productivity and advancement and progress and so on that has gotten us into this mess. So now, when we come back to the reality of our interbeing, and that all life is one life, and that, it's the connective tissue between things that is the thing, we're going to be able to create that more beautiful world.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. That's incredible, and what a note to end on. The series, this talk, this has been incredible, and we thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Mike?
Well, I just said thank you. I wonder how we could get in touch with Ron. Is it possible, or do you allow people to communicate with you?
Sure. I mean, if you haven't been to cosmosjournal.org, that's the journal.
All right.
And you can reach me through Cosmos Journal anytime.
All right.
Love to hear from you. Maybe we could end with a sound of the bell.
Absolutely.
And from that place of stillness, let us go forth and enjoy this beautiful day.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 2024. Have a good day.